This is Wake Up Sunday Morning, brought to you from Celebration Church in Barrie. We are an Anglican Network in Canada congregation. Good morning, I'm Derek Welsman, here along with Pastor Brian McVitty. Delighted to be a part of your Sunday morning. Toast, coffee, eggs, and Wake Up Sunday Morning, a great breakfast combination. Today's brain teaser is, in some churches, we are beginning a 40-day countdown to Easter called the season of Lent. Where does the word Lent come from? The answer is, Lent is Old English from lengthen. The days are lengthening, more sunlight, and hence the season of Lent. In Luke chapter 9, verse 51, we are told that Jesus set his face towards Jerusalem. He was well aware of what awaited him in Jerusalem. He was a man on a mission, and Jerusalem was his destination. This is the time of year when we too set our faces towards Jerusalem. Easter is about 40 days away, and we want to be fully prepared to appreciate all that Jesus has done for us. In some churches, the 40-day journey to Easter is called the season of Lent. This year, as we journey towards Jerusalem, we want to focus on deepening and strengthening our prayer life. Over the years, I've been struck that most people say that they pray, but most people also say that prayer is something that they struggle with. How do I find the time? What to say? How to sense God's presence? Martin Lloyd-Jones, a noted preacher from a previous generation, said, "There is nothing that tells the truth about us as Christian people so much as our prayer life." He meant that our practice of prayer is an excellent measure of our walk with God. We want to take these next 40 days to help you grow stronger in your prayers. We've called this series the Bible's School of Prayer. In this school of prayer, we will be taught by some of the best. We will be taught by the people in the Bible who also struggled with prayer. Our teachers will be people like Job, Daniel, Hannah, and of course, Jesus. Welcome to the Bible's School of Prayer. Here's Pastor Brian McVitty with the first part of today's message on prayer called Beginning Prayer. Please turn to Genesis chapter 24.
I do not consider the CBC to be very faith-friendly. Usually when the CBC reports on matters of faith, they're either critical or dismissive. So it caught my eye when I was scanning the CBC News and I saw the following headline. It read, "I was raised without religion and I don't want to make the same mistake with my son." So the author of this article for the CBC is writing about her own experience, so this is autobiographical, and she explains her background, that she is an agnostic from a Buddhist Chinese background. But her 11-year-old son has been baptized and attends a Catholic school and a Catholic church, and she intends for him to make his first communion and to be confirmed. Why, we might ask, is she doing this? Why would a nominal Buddhist from a Chinese background raise her son in this way? Well, as she explains in the article, she feels that she missed something crucial in her own upbringing. She was raised in Canada in the 1980s, and her parents' attitude was that she should choose her own faith. They were not going to impose anything on her. This meant that she was raised without any faith instruction. And now, as an adult and as a parent, she feels that she missed something important in her own upbringing. She goes on to explain that she felt this keenly when she attended a funeral for her husband's aunt. The evening before the funeral, the whole family gathered together at home for prayers, and they prayed together as a family. And then at the funeral the next day, they all participated in the prayers of the funeral service. She could see, both at the evening at home and then the next day in the church, how meaningful and comforting this was for everybody who was attending. So she's resolved that her son, now 11 years of age, was not going to have this faith absence in his life. And so he is being raised as a Christian in the Catholic Church. And then she concludes this CBC article by saying, quote, "And if he ever wants to say a prayer, unlike me, he will have one at the ready." Well, that was a fascinating article by this woman talking about her own parenting and her son. Even as an agnostic, she wanted to ensure that her son knew how to pray. So we might ask ourselves, is prayer a life skill? A life skill just like writing and math? I would say yes, and so does this agnostic mother writing for the CBC. Prayer is a life skill that she wants her son to master. Well, while we're on the subject of prayer, let me pose another question. Let me ask if we take prayer for granted, and maybe we shouldn't. This past Remembrance Day, Jubilee Elementary School in the town of Sydney Mines, Nova Scotia, told the Legion members who lead their ceremony that they could not include the customary prayer in the Remembrance Day ceremony in the school. They could lead the ceremony, but there could not be any prayer included. Maybe we take prayer for granted. And as I talk with individual Christians, even those who have been raised in the church from a young age, when asked what they struggle most in their faith, they often mention that they struggle the most with prayer. How to find the time for prayer, what to say, how to begin, and then how do you hear from God? It was interesting that even Mother Teresa, one of the great Christian heroes of our time, had seasons when she struggled in prayer as well. Well, this is all by way of an introduction to say that there's good reason why today we're beginning a new series called The Bible School of Prayer. Each week in this series, we will focus on one individual in the Bible, and we will discover what they can teach us about prayer. Now, some of these Bible characters may be well known to you, such as Daniel and Jesus. But some of these Bible characters are obscure, maybe like Habakkuk. And some are beyond obscure because they're not even named, which is the case with our focus today. Now, our objective in this series, the Bible School of Prayer, is to encourage you and to assist you to grow deeper in your own prayer life. We want to assist you and encourage you. There is a supplemental resource that I would recommend to accompany this series. It's a book by Michael Yosef, and it's called Life-Changing Prayers. That's Michael Yosef and his book called Life-Changing Prayers. Well, today, please turn with me to Genesis chapter 24, and our theme today is, How do I begin in prayer? And the irony is that our first teacher in this Bible School of Prayer is not even named. That's right. Today's teacher is not even named, but he gives us an excellent lesson in how to begin in prayer. So let's turn to Genesis chapter 24, and let me just give you a brief summary of the chapter before we look at the lessons regarding prayer. So this chapter begins with Abraham. Abraham is very advanced in age and is close to death. His wife Sarah has already died. He wants his son to have a wife, his son Isaac to have a wife, not an unbelieving wife from amongst the Canaanite tribes where Abraham and Isaac are living. So Abraham in this chapter commissions his most trusted servant to go back to Abraham's home region north of Syria in order to find a wife for his son Isaac. So just to do a little of the geography, Abraham is in Israel, south of what would be Jerusalem, and he's sending his trusted servant about 500 miles north of Damascus, into present-day Turkey, in order to find a wife for his son Isaac. Now we're going to focus on the servant who was commissioned by Abraham to travel this distance, 500 miles north, back to Abraham's home region to find a wife for Isaac. This servant is not mentioned in Genesis chapter 4. However, based on Genesis chapter 15 and based on tradition, it is thought that this servant is Eliezer, who is mentioned in Genesis 15. This is a bit of a guess, but in accord with tradition, we will refer to him in this chapter as Eliezer, but just to say that this is something of an educated guess. So my question for you is, in reading through this chapter, is this servant, Eliezer, a person of faith? I would contend that Eliezer doesn't show many signs of being a person of faith himself in this chapter. He consistently refers to the faith of Abraham, not his own faith, and that he is simply doing his best to fulfill the commission that has been given to him. If we look at the opening of chapter 24, Abraham commissions Eliezer with a very solemn oath. Then in verse 5, the very first thing that we hear from Eliezer is a possible objection. What if this doesn't work out? What if he's not able to fulfill this commission? So, whether Eliezer has a personal faith or not, Abraham does assure him of God's guidance and even tells him that an angel will be guiding him. So with all of that as a bit of background to this chapter, let's look at 4 quick lessons in prayer that we learn from Eliezer in Genesis chapter 24. So first of all, I want us to pay attention that Eliezer is a man of action. He plans well, he prepares well, he's Abraham's most trusted servant, and he puts himself in the place where he can be used by God. I think this is so wonderful and a great example for us. Eliezer takes action and puts himself in the place where he can be used by God. We see this as an example of prayer plus action. It's been said that it's much easier to steer a car when it's in motion as opposed to when it's simply sitting in your driveway. Well, Eliezer is a man in motion so that he can be moved and guided. And in fact, that we see that he puts himself exactly in the right place where he can be used by God. Eliezer is not a lump sitting in his lazy boy recliner asking God to do something in his life. Eliezer is in motion. Eliezer was chosen for this mission by Abraham because he is reliable, dependable, and he's a man of action. And as we see, his prayer takes place in the midst of action.
You're listening to Wake Up Sunday Morning from Celebration Church. Pastor Brian McVitty bringing us the first part of today's message on prayer called Beginning Prayer. As we focus on prayer, here is some encouragement to come as you are from Paul Turner.
Calling all wandering souls of the night. Darkness was shattered by the Father of lights. Sorrow has ceased, captives released. Flee from the dark and come as you are. Come as you are. Come as you are. There is a place safe in the Father's arms. Come as you are. Come as you are. Jesus is here. Surrender your heart and come as you are.
Come as you are, that's Paul Turner. We will continue our focus on prayer in just a moment. Whether it's a birthday, graduation, or honoring a loved one, we all want to mark life's milestones in a special way, like putting them on the radio. For a donation of $200, you can sponsor an episode of Wake Up Sunday Morning. During your show, we will set aside time to celebrate that milestone or memorial with our listeners. Make an upcoming episode your very own. To get started, drop us a message on the Wake Up Sunday Morning Facebook page. Here's Pastor Brian with the second part of today's message on prayer called Beginning Prayer.
Point number 2, the prayer. So this brings us to the prayer itself. Now, it's interesting that this is the first actual prayer in the Bible. Yes, there are instances where God spoke to Adam, and where God spoke to Noah, and where God spoke to Abraham. And yes, Abraham does intercede on behalf of his nephew Lot. But this is the first actual prayer that we would recognize where someone says, "Oh Lord, please do such and such for me." So, in today's first installment of the Bible School of Prayer, not only are we looking at a beginning prayer, but it's interesting that this is also the first prayer in the Bible. Now, I have to say, I love this prayer. If you're following with me in your Bible, this is verse 13 of Genesis chapter 24. Eliezer begins his prayer referencing the faith of Abraham and how good God has been to Abraham. But then in verse 13, Eliezer continues, "Behold, I'm standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out." I just love the honesty and the heartfelt sense that you get from this prayer. He's saying basically, "Here I am, God," and explains to God where he's standing, which I think is so cute, wonderful. And Eliezer is saying, "God, I'm not sure how this is going to work out, but you're going to have to help me in this situation." At least that's my interpretation of what Eliezer is saying. In the midst of his need, in the midst of action, Eliezer stops and prays to God. I don't think he has a lot of faith himself, but he is in a position of need, and so he just pours out his heart simply to God. Here is a man who is out of his depth. He's traveled 500 miles with 10 camels on a crucial assignment, and he's really not sure how this is all going to work out. And so in the moment, he prays to God. He is not eloquent, this is not formal, but it's very honest and heartfelt. He is sincerely seeking after God. Now, if you were just a beginner in prayer or starting to pray, please be encouraged, not only by the honesty and the shortness of this prayer, but also because in verse 15 we read, "Before he had done speaking, behold," his prayer is being answered even before he had finished speaking. I think that should be an encouragement to us all. In the Epistle of James, chapter 4, verse 2, we're told, "You do not have because you do not ask." Well, Eliezer bluntly, clearly asks for what he needs, and that should be an encouragement to us as well. And in that same chapter from James, we're told, "God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble." And in Eliezer, we see a very humble, obedient man. So it's fascinating for me to notice that in Genesis chapter 24, we have an unnamed person who we're referring to as Eliezer with a very short, halting prayer, but very sincere and heartfelt. But not only are we given his prayer in verse 13, but notice that just to emphasize what a great beginning in prayer this is, the prayer is repeated for us twice in this chapter. You might not think that it's such a wonderful prayer, but the biblical author has given it to us twice in this chapter. We get the prayer written out for us in verse 13, and then it's repeated in verse 43. I think we need to pay attention to that. I think the scriptures are saying to us that this is such a great prayer that I'm going to give it to you twice for emphasis. Pay attention here and learn from Eliezer. So just to summarize what we've learned from Eliezer's prayer, I would use the Nike slogan, just do it. Just do it. Prayer does not need to be complicated or fancy or long. Just do it. So, point number 3, a sign. In his prayer, Eliezer asked for a sign. So let's discuss this for a moment. So in his prayer, Eliezer says, "Let the girl to whom I say, 'Let down your jar that I may drink,' and then says to me, 'Drink, and I will water your camels also,' let her be the one whom you have appointed to be the wife of your servant Isaac." So this is all part of Eliezer's prayer. He is asking for a sign. So let me just unpack this so we're clear what he's asking. So Eliezer is saying to God, I need a sign. And how about the following? I'll say to one of the girls coming out to get water, "Could you give me a drink?" And if she's the right one, she will say to me, "Sure, I'll give you a drink, and I will also water your camels." So what do we think of this in terms of prayer? This asking for a sign, and Eliezer's pretty specific. Let me just point out that this is not bargaining with God. And this is also not laying out a fleece like Gideon did, which is actually asking for a miracle. Eliezer is asking for a sign. Henry Blackaby, in his course Experiencing God, says that God usually speaks to us through a combination of 4 ways. God speaks to us through the Bible, through prayer, through confirming circumstances, and through other believers. So asking for a sign is not something we see in every instance of prayer, but here Eliezer is asking for a sign to guide him, and God provides the sign just as he describes. Now, when setting out this sign, we can also see some wisdom in what Eliezer is requesting. This is a little bit of character assessment of the possible bride for Isaac. I think this shows a lot of wisdom. Let me just unpack this for you. Eliezer came with 10 camels, and one person is determined that a somewhat thirsty camel, that's right, a somewhat thirsty camel can easily drink 9 gallons of water. So, if we take 10 camels times 9 gallons of water, that equals 90 gallons of water. Assuming that Rebecca's jar held a gallon of water, that is a lot of hard work. She has to haul 90 gallons of water for 10 thirsty camels. This is a test of character, and we're told that Rebecca does all of this cheerfully. So if Eliezer is a man of action, we see here that Rebecca is a woman of action as well. This is a strong, gutsy lady. Point number 4, confirmation. So Eliezer has prayed to God, a simple, heartfelt prayer, and he's asked for a sign, and which he thinks God has now answered, but now he wants confirmation. Look at verse 33. I think this is so insightful. After his long journey, after being hungry, after being tired, he sits down to a banquet which Rebekah's family has prepared for him. But even before beginning to eat, as hungry as he probably is, after all these days of travel, Eliezer doesn't want to begin eating until he has confirmation that his prayer has been answered, that he has read the sign correctly. Before he eats, he recounts to Laban, Rebekah's brother, and the rest of the household everything that has brought him to this moment, including the sign that he asked of God. And then finally in verse 50, Rebekah's father and her brother responds, "This thing comes from the Lord." They provide confirmation that this is God's will and the answer to Eliezer's prayer. The actual final confirmation comes in verse 58. They ask Rebekah if she's willing to go with Eliezer. So let's just remember that this is a big ask. Rebekah will be traveling 500 miles away from home, will probably never see her parents or brother again, and she will be the wife of a man she has never met. Yes, wow, that is a pretty big ask. But God must have been moving in her heart to provide confirmation. So they ask her, "Will you go with this man?" And Rebekah responds, "I will go." So the sign that Eliezer asks for is confirmed both by Rebekah's family and by Rebekah herself. So in today's first lesson in the Bible School of Prayer, 4 key points that we learn from Eliezer. First of all, he's a man of action and placed himself in the place where he could be used by God. Second point is prayer is short, simple, and heartfelt. Thirdly, he asks a sign from God. And then fourth, he seeks confirmation of that sign as the answer to his prayer. So in conclusion, what do we learn from Eliezer? If you were just beginning in prayer, use your own words from your heart right where you are. And a quote from Nike, just do it. Just start and do it. Now, we will be giving you more practical tips through the course of this series, but it is ideal if you can establish a daily time for prayer and Bible reading. Same place, same time, and use a journal. We will have more practical tips to give you through the course of this series. So blessings to you as you take new steps and grow in your life of prayer.
That was Pastor Brian McVitty with today's focus on prayer called Beginning Prayer, as taught by Eliezer in Genesis chapter 24. You're listening to Wake Up Sunday Morning from Celebration Church in Barrie, and as we wrap up, we trust that you will be attending your own church today. But if you're new to the area or you are on that search for a Bible-based, Christ-centered place to worship, we want to invite you to join us. Celebration Church. Service time is every Sunday morning at 10:30, and we're located at 460 Yonge Street. We depend on you to support these radio broadcasts. Please consider a donation to Wake Up Sunday Morning. To do so, head over to celebrationchurchbarrie.ca and click on the Donate button. I'm Derek Welsman on behalf of Pastor Brian and everyone at Celebration Church in Barrie. Have a blessed day.